At 5:28 p.m. on Friday, May 4, 2007, a tornado touched down in rural Cass County, North Dakota, approximately 2 miles west of the town of Mapleton. The storm had developed from a supercell thunderstorm that formed earlier that afternoon over southeastern North Dakota. The National Weather Service in Grand Forks had issued a tornado warning for the area at 5:18 p.m., 10 minutes before the tornado was on the ground. The warning reached local emergency management. Sirens sounded in Mapleton, but for a town of fewer than 800 people, the warning time was measured in minutes. Many residents had no basement, many had no time. The tornado moved east-northeast at roughly 40 miles per hour. It was rated an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale with estimated winds of 150 miles per hour. The damage path was about 20 miles long and up to 1 mile wide at its peak. Within minutes, the storm crossed into the western edge of Mapleton, tearing through a row of houses, a grain elevator, and several farmsteads. The first structures hit were frame houses on the outskirts. Roofs were ripped off. Walls collapsed. Vehicles were thrown into fields. The tornado then struck a mobile home park on the south side of town. Of the 27 homes in that park, nearly all were destroyed or heavily damaged. One person died, 30 others were injured. The National Weather Service dispatch logs show that a spotter reported a large tornado at 5:32 p.m. At that point, the storm was already inside the city limits. Law enforcement officers were scrambling to notify residents block by block. The Cass County Sheriff's Office had received multiple 911 calls reporting debris, power flashes, and rotating clouds. But by the time the first responders could mobilize, the tornado had already passed through the most populated area. The entire event, from touchdown to exit east of Mapleton, lasted roughly 12 minutes. What happened in those 12 minutes would be reconstructed in detail over the following weeks by the National Weather Service, local emergency managers, and the state fire marshal's office. The timeline was compiled from radar data, spotter reports, damage surveys, and interviews with survivors. At 5:28 p.m., the tornado touched down in an open field. At 5:30, it struck the first residences. At 5:34, it entered the mobile home park. At 5:36, it reached the downtown area, damaging the grain elevator, the post office, and a dozen businesses. At 5:38, the tornado began to lift as it moved into open farmlands east of town. At 5:40, the sirens stopped. The storm was gone, but the aftermath was not. Search and rescue teams worked through the night. The single fatality was a 65-year-old man who had taken shelter in his mobile home. The home had been lifted off its foundation and rolled several times. He was found more than 100 feet from where his home had stood. 30 people were taken to local hospitals with injuries ranging from lacerations to fractures. Some had been thrown into ditches. Others had been trapped under debris. Power was out for days. Water systems were compromised. The American Red Cross set up a shelter in the nearby town of Harwood. How could this have happened? The tornado warning had been issued. The sirens had sounded. Yet a man died, 3 dozen were injured, and the town sustained millions of dollars in damage. The question was not whether the warning existed, but whether it was enough. The National Weather Service had tracked the supercell from its early stages. At 4:45 p.m., a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for Cass County, predicting hail and damaging winds. At 5:10, the Weather Service radar showed a strong rotation signature in the storm. At 5:18, the tornado warning was issued. That gave residents roughly 10 minutes from the warning's receipt to the tornado's arrival. In a small town with limited media outlets and siren coverage that relied on a single activation switch, 10 minutes might have been enough for some, but not for others. The mobile home park was a particular vulnerability. Mobile homes offer little structural resistance to EF3 winds. The National Weather Service had issued a special statement 2 days before the outbreak, emphasizing the risk of tornadoes in the region, but mobile home residents often have no safe room, no basement, and limited options for sheltering in place. The man who died had planned to go to a neighbor's basement, but the storm arrived too fast. His wife survived by lying in a bathtub which was thrown across the room. The meteorological setup on May 4, 2007 was a textbook recipe for tornado outbreaks. A strong low-pressure system over the northern plains pulled warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico. A dry line pushed east across the Dakotas. Wind shear values were high. The atmosphere was unstable. Forecasters at the Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma, had issued a moderate risk of severe weather for the region that morning. By midday, that risk was upgraded to high. The outbreak that day would go on to produce more than 60 tornadoes from Kansas to the Canadian border, including the EF5 that destroyed Greensburg, Kansas, later that night. Mapleton was one of the first towns hit in that long, deadly parade. But the systems that were supposed to protect Mapleton had several weak points. The siren that covered the west side of town was activated by the Cass County Sheriff's Office after they received the National Weather Service warning. However, the siren was older, and its effective range was only half a mile. The town's population was scattered across a 2-square-mile area. Not everyone could hear it. Television and radio warnings were available, but many residents had their televisions off and radios tuned to music. NOAA weather radio ownership was low. When the tornado struck at 5:28, the sun was still up, the sky was dark green, and the rain was falling in sheets. Many people saw the tornado only when it was already on top of them. In the weeks after, investigators from the National Weather Service conducted a damage survey that confirmed the EF3 rating. They also found that the tornado had produced multiple vortices at times, which explained the erratic damage patterns. Some homes were completely swept away while nearby trees were hardly damaged. This indicated that the tornado was strong but narrow in its most violent core. The worst damage occurred in a swath less than 300 yards wide through the center of Mapleton. The mobile home park fell directly in that path. The human cost was not measured only in injuries. The mental toll on survivors was documented in local news reports. Children who had hidden in closets described the sound as a freight train. Parents who had thrown themselves over their children recalled the pressure change that made their ears pop. The grain elevator, which had stood for decades, was reduced to a pile of twisted metal. The post office had its roof torn off. 2 churches were damaged. The high school gymnasium lost its roof and was used as a triage center. The town water tower was hit by debris and began leaking. The fire department station was damaged and the fire trucks were trapped inside. Emergency response was coordinated by the Cass County Emergency Management Office. Within an hour of the tornado's passage, state and federal agencies were notified. The North Dakota Department of Emergency Services arrived by 7 that evening. The Federal Emergency Management Agency was requested but did not declare a disaster until a week later. The damage was estimated at $10 million. For a town of fewer than 800 people, that amount represented roughly $12,000 per resident. The insurance industry later reported that more than half the damaged structures were underinsured. Why does the Mapleton tornado still matter? It matters because it illustrates a recurring problem in severe weather safety, the gap between warning and response. The technology to detect tornadoes has improved dramatically in the last 2 decades. Doppler radar can now identify rotation in clouds minutes before a tornado touches down. The National Weather Service has invested heavily in warning systems, spotter networks, and communication infrastructure. But the weakest link remains the human factor. Warnings are only effective if they are received, understood, and acted upon in time. In Mapleton, the warning was received, but the time was short. The population was vulnerable. The infrastructure for immediate shelter was inadequate. The case also highlighted the need for better dissemination methods for tornado warnings in rural communities. After the 2007 outbreak, several states, including North Dakota, expanded their outdoor siren coverage and invested in wireless emergency alerts. The federal government pushed for broader adoption of NOAA weather radios, but even today, the same vulnerabilities exist in small towns across the plains. Basements are rare, mobile homes are common. The gap between a warning and a tornado's impact can be measured in minutes. There were no criminal findings, no lawsuits, and no major policy changes that emerged specifically from the Mapleton tornado. The event did not capture national attention the way Greensburg did that same night, but for the people who lived there, the storm changed everything. Some families rebuilt, others moved away. The town has since recovered, but the memory of that 12-minute event remains embedded in the landscape. A new water tower was built. The grain elevator was replaced by a modern facility. The mobile home park was rebuilt with stronger ties and stricter building codes, but the scars are still visible in the way people watch the sky on a May afternoon. In the days that followed, the National Weather Service issued an official report that contained a timeline, damage photos, and a list of lessons learned. The report noted that the tornado warning lead time was 10 minutes, which was near the national average at the time. It also noted that the mobile home park had no designated storm shelter. The county later applied for federal grants to build a community safe room, which was completed in 2009. That safe room now stands in the center of town, a concrete structure capable of holding 300 people. It is used as a storage shed during fair weather, but on stormy days it becomes a place where a small community can gather and wait. The story of the Mapleton tornado is not one of failure by the Weather Service, nor is it a story of negligence by local officials. It is a story of the limits of prediction. The atmosphere that day was primed for violence. The storm was tracked, the warning was issued, sirens sounded, but the tornado arrived faster than anyone could fully react. One man died, others were hurt, and the rest of the town was left to rebuild in a world where the skies can turn black without warning and the only defense is a thin margin of time. The event remains a case study in emergency management textbooks. It is taught to meteorology students as an example of a successful warning yet a fatal outcome. The lesson is that warnings themselves are not the goal. The goal is survival. And survival depends on a chain of events that must begin long before the storm is on the horizon. That chain includes public education, infrastructure investment, and a recognition that in a small town, every second matters. Mapleton, North Dakota sits 30 miles west of Fargo. In 2007, it was a quiet farming community with a grain elevator, a post office, a few churches, and a school. Still is a quiet community today, but one that carries a storm inside its history. Anyone who was there that day remembers exactly where they were at 5:28 p.m., when the sky turned green and the rain began to slow and the air went still, and then the roar began. The roar began at 5:28 p.m. Central Daylight Time on the 4th of May 2007. The tornado that had been rotating in the clouds for several minutes now touched down just west of Mapleton, North Dakota. It was a multi-vortex tornado, meaning that within the main circulation, smaller, more intense vortices spun like drill bits. These subvortices were responsible for the erratic damage patterns that investigators would later map. One home would be obliterated while the house next door remained standing with only broken windows. That is the signature of a multi-vortex tornado. The tornado moved east-northeast at approximately 40 miles per hour. Its forward speed allowed little time for anyone who had not already taken shelter. The first structures hit were on the western edge of town, a cluster of farmhouses and outbuildings. Within seconds, the tornado entered the residential area. The National Weather Service later determined that the tornado's width at this point was about 300 yards, but the most violent winds were confined to a core less than 100 yards wide. The EF3 rating came from wind speeds estimated at 150 to 160 miles per hour. At those speeds, a well-built wood frame house can be torn from its foundation. The mobile home park at the center of town suffered the heaviest damage. Mobile homes are not designed to withstand tornado-force winds. Even when tied down with anchor systems, the structure itself lacks the rigidity to resist the uplift and lateral forces of an EF3 tornado. In the Mapleton Park, many units were flipped, rolled, or completely disintegrated. Debris from the park was scattered over a mile downwind. Clothing, insulation, furniture, and personal belongings were found wrapped around trees and fence lines. The single fatality occurred in this park. He was a 60-year-old man who had lived in the park for several years. He took shelter in his home, but the structure did not survive. First responders arrived within minutes. The Cass County Sheriff's Office, the Mapleton Fire Department, and the North Dakota Highway Patrol all responded, but they faced immediate obstacles. The fire station itself had been damaged. The overhead doors were jammed by debris and the fire trucks inside could not exit. Firefighters had to climb out through a side door and commandeer personal vehicles to reach the hardest-hit areas. The triage center was set up at the high school gymnasium, which had lost its roof. Medical personnel worked under tarps and in the open air as rain continued to fall. The injured were transported to hospitals in Fargo and West Fargo. Ambulances made multiple trips. Some victims were driven by neighbors in pickup trucks. The search and rescue operation lasted through the night. Crews went door to door. Those who were unaccounted for were tracked down by relatives. The utility companies shut off natural gas and electricity to prevent fires. The water tower, which had been punctured by flying debris, continued to leak for hours. By dawn on May 5th, the full scope of the damage was visible. Approximately 30 homes were destroyed. Another 50 sustained major damage. The grain elevator was a pile of twisted metal and spilled grain. The post office roof was gone and the interior was waterlogged. 2 churches had structural damage. The school building was still standing but had significant roof and window damage. The National Weather Service survey team arrived later that morning. They walked the damage path from west to east, measuring debris patterns and assigning ratings to individual structures. They used the enhanced Fujita scale, which had been adopted earlier that year. The scale rates damage from 0 to 5 based on the degree of damage to specific building types. The team found evidence of EF3 damage in the mobile home park and in several well-built homes. They also noted evidence of multiple vortices. Debris was deposited in convergent patterns and damage was inconsistent along the path. The total path length was 6.4 miles. The maximum width was 400 yards. The tornado lifted about a mile east of Mapleton, where it dissipated in an open field. The survey team also interviewed survivors. Those interviews revealed something important about the warning process. The tornado warning had been issued by the National Weather Service at 5:18 p.m. The siren on the west side of town had been activated by the Cass County Sheriff's Office at 5:21. But the tornado touched down at 5:28. That left a lead time of 10 minutes from warning issuance, but only 7 minutes from siren activation. In those 7 minutes, a person could walk about half a mile. But to reach a safe shelter, a basement, a storm cellar, an interior room, the time was barely enough if you were already near one. For those in the mobile home park, there was no basement. The nearest public shelter was the school, which was several blocks away. Some residents tried to drive away. That is not recommended, but panic can override logic. The fatality in the mobile home park was the only death, but there were 18 injuries. 2 were critical. Injuries ranged from cuts and bruises to fractures and head trauma. The man who died had been a resident of the park for a decade. His family later told reporters that he had not believed the warning was serious. He had lived through many tornado warnings before and nothing had happened. That is a common response in the plains. The phenomenon is called warning fatigue. When false alarms are frequent, the perceived risk decreases. In Mapleton, the previous year had seen several severe thunderstorm warnings but no tornado touchdowns. The memory of those warnings may have influenced his decision not to seek a stronger shelter. The broader context of the May 4, 2007 outbreak is essential to understanding why Mapleton matters. The same storm system that produced the Mapleton tornado also produced the Greensburg, Kansas tornado, the only EF5 of that year. The atmospheric conditions that day were extreme. A strong low-pressure system over the Rockies drew warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, a jet stream brought cold, dry air from the Rockies. The clash created ideal conditions for supercell thunderstorms. The National Weather Service had issued a high-risk outlook early that morning. The Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma had predicted a major tornado outbreak. They were correct, but the outbreak was not limited to Kansas and North Dakota. Tornadoes touched down in Colorado, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, and South Dakota. More than 60 tornadoes were confirmed. The Mapleton tornado was one of the first of the day. It was not the strongest, but it was the one that hit a populated area early enough to test the warning system. And the system, while effective in many ways, showed its limitations. In the weeks following the tornado, the Cass County Emergency Management Office conducted a review. They found that the siren activation process worked as designed, but the coverage area was insufficient. The town had only two sirens. One covered the eastern half and the other the western half. The western siren was older and had a range of about half a mile. The tornado touched down just beyond that range. Some residents on the western edge of town reported that they did not hear the siren at all. Others heard it but could not locate the sound because of the wind and rain. The review recommended adding a third siren and upgrading the existing ones. That was done within 2 years. The review also highlighted the problem of shelter access. The mobile home park had no storm shelter. The nearest public shelter was the school, but the school was not designed as a tornado shelter. Its gymnasium had a large roof span and was vulnerable. The school itself was damaged. The review recommended building a community safe room. The Federal Emergency Management Agency provided grants for that purpose. The safe room was completed in 2009. It is a concrete structure that can withstand EF5 winds. It holds 300 people. In a town of fewer than 800, that capacity is sufficient for most of the population. The safe room is now used for storage during fair weather, but on storm days, it is open to the public. The National Weather Service's official report on the Mapleton tornado was released in June 2007. It contained a detailed timeline, damage photos, and a list of lessons learned. Among the lessons, the need for better dissemination of warnings to mobile home parks, the importance of redundant warning methods, and the value of community safe rooms. The report also noted that the fatality could have been prevented if the victim had been in a more secure structure. That sounds obvious, but it points to a deeper problem. Many people in tornado-prone areas do not have access to safe rooms. The cost of building a private safe room is several $1,000s. For low-income residents, that is often impossible. Public funding for community safe rooms is limited. The Mapleton tornado also raised questions about the role of the media in tornado warnings. Local television stations had broadcast the warning, but the tornado struck during the dinner hour. Many people were not watching television. Some were outside, some were driving home from work. The rise of mobile phones and wireless emergency alerts was still a few years away. The first tests of the wireless emergency alert system did not begin until 2009. In 2007, the primary means of getting a warning were outdoor sirens, television, radio, and NOAA weather radio. NOAA weather radio ownership in Mapleton was estimated at less than 20%. That is typical for rural communities. In the years since 2007, the technology has improved. Doppler radar resolution has increased. The National Weather Service now uses a system called WarnGen that automates the warning process. The lead time for tornado warnings has increased from an average of around 10 minutes in 2007 to about 14 minutes today. But the gap between warning and shelter remains. The human factor is still the weakest link. People need to receive the warning, interpret it, and act quickly. In a mobile home, there is no safe option. The only correct action is to evacuate to a sturdy building, but that requires time, transportation, and knowledge of where to go. The Mapleton tornado is studied in meteorology programs across the United States. It is used as an example of a successful warning that still resulted in a death. The case forces students to confront the limits of technology. Radar can detect rotation. Warnings can be issued, sirens can sound, but if the population is not prepared, the outcome can still be tragic. The case also illustrates the importance of post-event surveys. The detailed damage mapping and survivor interviews provided data that improved future warning strategies. The National Weather Service used the lessons from Mapleton and other 2007 tornadoes to refine their impact-based warning system. That system, implemented in 2015, adds tags to warnings that indicate the level of threat, base, considerable, or catastrophic. The Mapleton scenario would likely have been tagged as considerable. The human stories from Mapleton are not widely known outside the region, but they are preserved in local archives and in the memories of those who lived through the storm. The man who died was remembered as a quiet neighbor who kept to himself. The families that lost their homes had to rebuild with insurance payouts that were often inadequate. Some left town, others stayed. The town itself has recovered. The population has grown slightly since 2007. The grain elevator was rebuilt. The post office was repaired. The school was renovated. The mobile home park was rebuilt with stronger building codes and better anchor systems. But the landscape is different. The trees that once lined the streets are gone. The skyline is lower. The Mapleton tornado is part of a larger story about the vulnerability of small towns to natural disasters. Small towns often have limited resources. They cannot afford multiple sirens. They cannot build safe rooms for every neighborhood. They rely on county and state agencies for support. The emergency management system is designed to scale up, but the first few minutes are critical. In those minutes, local resources are the only resources. In Mapleton, the local fire department could not respond because its own station was damaged. That is a failure mode that has been studied and addressed. Fire stations in tornado-prone areas are now built to higher standards, but the lesson was learned at the cost of delayed response. The map of the 2007 outbreak shows a long line of tornadoes stretching from the Texas Panhandle to the Canadian border. The Mapleton tornado was a small dot on that map, but for the people who live there, that dot is the center of their world. The storm is part of their identity. It is discussed at family gatherings. It is referenced in local history exhibits. It is a reminder of the power of nature and the importance of preparation. In the end, the Mapleton tornado is a case study in the limits of prediction and the difficulty of protection. The technology is better now than it was in 2007, but the fundamental problem remains. A tornado can appear with little warning, and the time to act is measured in seconds. The residents of Mapleton know this. They watch the sky differently. When the sirens test on the first Wednesday of each month, they pause. They remember the sound of the real thing, and they hope that the next time the margin will be just enough. The National Weather Service office in Grand Forks, North Dakota, issued the tornado warning for Mapleton at 5:59 p.m. on the 26th of August 2007. The warning was based on Doppler radar data showing a strong rotation signature in a thunderstorm moving northeast at roughly 35 miles per hour. The warning text explicitly stated that a tornado was likely and urged immediate shelter. At that moment, the rotation was approximately 3 miles southwest of town. The lead time was about 7 minutes to decide to move to survive. The Cass County Emergency Management Director received the warning through the National Weather Service's NOAA weather wire. He activated the outdoor warning sirens using a console in his home office. The activation was manual. It took less than 30 seconds. The sirens sounded at 6 p.m. The first siren, located near the grain elevator, covered the eastern half of town. The second siren on the western edge was older and less powerful. Its tone was lower and its range was limited. Residents on the far west side described the sound as faint. Some thought it was a train. Others did not hear it at all. The tornado touched down at approximately 6:03 p.m. according to damage surveys and witness accounts. It struck a field first, then crossed onto a gravel road leading into town. The first structure it hit was a farmhouse on the southwest edge of Mapleton. The house was lifted off its foundation and rotated. The roof was peeled away. The family inside had taken shelter in the basement. They survived. The tornado then entered the town limits, crossing onto Lincoln Street. It was at this point that the path width widened to roughly 200 yards. The mobile home park lay directly in its path. The mobile home park contained 41 units. The majority were single-wide trailers. The anchors were concrete blocks set on the ground, not deep pilings driven into the earth. The tornado's winds were estimated at 135 to 140 miles per hour. That is the upper end of an EF2 rating. At that speed, the pressure difference can lift a mobile home off its anchors and overturn it. The structural failure is near instantaneous. Residents inside have no time to brace themselves. Survivors from the mobile home park reported a sound like a freight train. Then the windows burst inward, the walls buckled, the floors tilted. Several people were thrown from their homes. One resident, a woman in her 60s, clung to the frame of her bathroom door. She watched as the ceiling was torn away. Her neighbor's trailer was flipped onto its side. The neighbor, a man named Gerald, was found in the debris field 50 yards away. He had broken ribs and a concussion but survived. He later said he did not hear the siren. He was cooking dinner. The television was on. He did not realize a tornado was coming until the roof began to shake. The victim of the Mapleton tornado, Robert Schmidt, lived in a home on the western edge of the mobile home park. His home was a double-wide with a small crawl space. He had no basement and no safe room. His wife was not home at the time. She was working in Fargo. Robert was alone. When the siren sounded, he did not hear it. The wind and rain were loud. He may have been watching television, but the station he was watching was broadcasting coverage of the severe weather. Witnesses later reported that the station had cut to a live radar map and was showing the warning. But Robert's house was on the edge of the coverage area for the siren, and the television may have been on a different channel. No one knows for certain. What is known is that Robert Schmidt was found in his living room. The house had been lifted off its foundation. The living room floor had folded and collapsed. He was pinned under debris. The time of death was estimated to be between 6:05 and 6:08 p.m. He was 63 years old. He had lived in Mapleton for 22 years. His wife, after learning of the tornado, drove from Fargo to the scene. She was not allowed into the neighborhood until the next morning. She identified her husband at the Cass County Coroner's office. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and torso. The emergency response began immediately after the tornado passed. The first 911 calls came in at 6:07 p.m. The Cass County Sheriff's Office dispatched deputies to Mapleton. The Mapleton Fire Department, which had its station located on Main Street, was unable to respond. The station had sustained damage. The roof was partially collapsed. The fire truck inside was buried under insulation and drywall. Firefighters had to extricate the truck manually before they could respond. That took 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, neighbors began digging through rubble with their bare hands. Power lines were down. Natural gas leaks were reported. The scene was chaotic and dangerous. At 6:15 p.m., the National Weather Service sent a storm survey team to Mapleton. They arrived the following morning. The team included a meteorologist and a damage survey specialist. They used GPS equipment to map the tornado path. They measured the width of the debris field. They photographed every damaged structure. They interviewed survivors and emergency responders. The goal was to assign an EF rating and determine the exact track. The survey concluded that the tornado was an EF2 with peak winds of 140 miles per hour. The path length was 4.3 miles. The maximum width was 250 yards. The survey also noted a specific anomaly. The mobile home park was hit at the point where the tornado was at its weakest. The winds had not yet reached their maximum. If the tornado had been at its peak when it hit the park, the damage would have been more severe. The homes would have been completely flattened rather than overturned. That nuance mattered for future building codes, but for the residents, the distinction was academic. Their homes were destroyed regardless. The Cass County Emergency Management Review, completed in November 2007, contained a timeline that highlighted several missed opportunities. At 5:47 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe thunderstorm warning for the area. The warning mentioned the possibility of tornadoes. The Cass County dispatcher received that warning but did not activate the sirens. Sirens are only activated for tornado warnings, not severe thunderstorm warnings. That policy was standard, but the severe thunderstorm warning had specific language. This storm is capable of producing a tornado. Some emergency managers interpret that as a trigger for early siren activation. In Cass County, the policy was to wait for a tornado warning. The tornado warning came at 5:59 p.m., 1 minute before the siren activation. That was the official trigger, but the delay may have cost valuable seconds. The time between warning issuance and siren activation is usually less than 1 minute. In this case, it was approximately 1 minute and 30 seconds. That is within acceptable limits. However, the siren on the western edge of town did not activate at the same volume as the eastern siren. An investigation found that the western siren had a failing amplifier. The sound output was reduced by roughly 40%. The maintenance records showed that the siren had been tested a month prior and had passed, but the test was conducted during daylight hours when ambient noise was low. The test did not account for the noise of heavy rain and wind. The review recommended that all sirens be tested under simulated storm conditions. It also recommended that sirens be equipped with backup batteries and that amplifiers be checked more frequently. Those recommendations were implemented in 2008. The replacement of the old siren was completed in early 2009. The town now has 3 sirens. Each can be activated individually or all at once. The system is tested monthly. But the deeper question remains, could anything have saved Robert Schmidt? The answer depends on the assumptions. If the western siren had been functioning properly, he might have heard the warning. But would he have acted? He had no basement. The nearest sturdy building was the school, which was 4 blocks away. That is a distance that takes about 2 minutes to run. By the time he heard the siren, the tornado was already visible. He would have had less than 1 minute to get to the school, and the school was not designed as a tornado shelter. Its gymnasium had failed in a previous storm in 2006. The school itself was damaged in this tornado. It is possible that even if he had reached the school, he might not have been safe. The village of Mapleton had discussed building a community safe room before 2007. The town council had allocated funds for a feasibility study. The study was completed in 2005. The cost estimate was $400,000 for a structure that could hold 200 people. The town council debated whether to proceed. Some residents argued that the cost was too high. Others argued that a safe room would never be used since tornadoes were rare. The decision was postponed. After the 2007 tornado, the cost-benefit calculation changed. The town applied for a FEMA grant. The grant was approved in 2008 for the full amount. Construction began in the spring of 2009. The safe room opened in September of that year. The safe room is a 1,500-square-foot concrete building with a rated wind speed of 250 miles per hour. It has its own backup generator. It is located on the property of the American Legion Post, which is near the center of town. During severe weather warnings, the American Legion opens the building to the public. The town also developed a system of volunteer storm spotters. The spotters are trained by the National Weather Service. They use two-way radios to communicate with the Cass County Emergency Management Office. In the event of a tornado watch, spotters are deployed to predetermined locations. They watch the sky and report any signs of rotation. This system was not in place in 2007. It was built in the aftermath. The National Weather Service's final report on the Mapleton tornado included a section on public response. It noted that while the warning was timely, the public's awareness of what to do was insufficient. A survey conducted by the University of North Dakota months after the storm found that only 42% of Mapleton residents knew where the nearest public shelter was. Of those, only 18% had actually visited the shelter. Most residents assumed they would shelter in their homes. That assumption was deadly for mobile home dwellers. The report also examined the role of NOAA weather radios. The town had a low penetration rate. The National Weather Service had promoted the radios for years, but many residents saw them as unnecessary. After the tornado, the Cass County Emergency Management Office distributed 500 radios free of charge to residents of Mapleton and surrounding areas. The radios were programmed to alert only for tornado warnings in Cass County. That program was paid for by a Homeland Security grant. The grant was renewed in 2010 and again in 2011. By 2015, approximately 70% of Mapleton households had a NOAA weather radio. The state of North Dakota also changed its laws. In 2009, the North Dakota legislature passed a bill requiring all mobile home parks to have a storm shelter or a community safe room. The bill also required mobile home owners to be provided with a map of the nearest shelter. The law went into effect in 2011. The mobile home park in Mapleton was rebuilt with a small concrete shelter that holds 30 people. The shelter is located in the center of the park. It is a windowless building with a steel door. It is not large enough to hold all residents, but it can hold one person per unit. The parking lot was also redesigned to allow for easier evacuation during storms. The financial impact of the tornado on Mapleton was severe. The town lost its tax base for months. Businesses were closed. The grain elevator, which was the largest employer, was shut down for repairs. The total property damage was estimated at $7 million. That was roughly 10% of the town's total assessed value. The Federal Emergency Management Agency provided public assistance grants to cover debris removal, emergency response costs, and infrastructure repairs. The total FEMA payout was $1.8 million. Individual assistance, which would have helped residents with uninsured losses, was not approved. State officials appealed that decision. It was denied. The town relied on private donations and church groups for much of the rebuilding. The human toll beyond the fatality included 23 injuries. Most were minor cuts and bruises. 2 people required hospitalization. One was a young girl who had a piece of glass lodged in her abdomen. She recovered after surgery. The emotional impact was longer lasting. A study by the North Dakota Department of Health tracked mental health outcomes in Mapleton for 2 years after the tornado. It found that 35% of residents reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The rate was highest among those who were in their homes during the tornado. The study led to the creation of a regional disaster mental health team, which is now activated after every major weather event in Cass County. The tornado also changed the relationship between the National Weather Service and the public. In 2008, the Grand Forks office launched a community outreach program. Meteorologists began visiting small towns in the spring to give presentations on tornado safety. The program was called Know Your Warning, Know Your Shelter. It reached 5,000 people in the first year. The program is still active. It has been credited with improving response times and reducing panic during subsequent tornado warnings. The Mapleton tornado is not a headline event. It is a footnote in the larger story of severe weather in the northern plains. But for meteorologists and emergency managers, it is a reference point. It is used in training exercises to illustrate the importance of siren placement, the difficulty of reaching vulnerable populations, and the value of community safe rooms. The National Weather Service's Storm Prediction Center includes Mapleton in its database of significant tornadoes because of the fatality in a mobile home park. The case is cited in the agency's annual operations plan. In the years since the technology has advanced, mobile phones now automatically receive wireless emergency alerts. The National Weather Service has a system called impact-based warnings that includes tags for catastrophic damage potential. The lead time averages 14 minutes across the country, but the pattern remains. In 2023, the United States had 125 tornado-related deaths. Roughly half of those occurred in mobile homes. The same vulnerability exists. The same gaps in warning and shelter persist. Mapleton has had 3 tornado warnings since 2007. None have resulted in touchdowns. The safe room has been used twice for severe thunderstorms with high winds. Residents report that when the siren sounds, they go to the safe room. They do not wait, they do not question. The memory of 2007 is still fresh. The town rebuilt, but the skyline is lower. The trees are shorter. The sound of heavy rain still makes people pause. The storm passed, but its imprint on the community remains. At 6:32 p.m. on the evening of August 26, 2007, the National Weather Service office in Grand Forks issued a tornado warning for southeastern Cass County. The warning was based on radar indications of strong rotation. The storm was moving northeast at 35 miles per hour. The warning included the town of Mapleton. The warning was transmitted to the county dispatch center. Dispatch activated the outdoor warning siren in Mapleton. The siren sounded at 6:33 p.m., but the siren was not heard by everyone. In the mobile home park, residents later reported that the siren was faint. Some said they did not hear it at all. The siren was mounted on a pole near the fire station. The station was located on the western edge of town. The mobile home park was on the eastern edge. Between them lay a row of grain elevators and a stand of mature cottonwood trees. The sound waves had to travel nearly a mile, passing through structures and foliage. The siren was designed for a range of 1 mile in open terrain. The trees and buildings reduced that effective range. The National Weather Service would later note in its service assessment that the siren coverage did not reach all residential areas. The assessment recommended that communities test siren audibility during risk assessments. Mapleton had never conducted such a test. The mobile home park consisted of 32 units arranged in 4 rows. The homes were built between 1970 and 1995. They were not tied down to concrete foundations. They rested on cinder blocks or metal stands. The park had no community shelter. The manager, who lived in a single-family home adjacent to the park, had a basement, but he did not open it to residents. He later told investigators that he assumed people would go to their own homes. He did not realize that mobile homes offered no protection. The tornado touched down at 6:35 p.m. It first struck a farmstead 2 miles southwest of Mapleton. The farmhouse lost its roof. 2 barns were destroyed. The occupants were in the basement. They emerged to find their property unrecognizable. The tornado continued northeast. It crossed a county road at 6:36 p.m. A pickup truck was driving on that road. The driver saw the funnel. He accelerated. He turned into a field and lay down in a ditch. The tornado passed 50 yards to his left. He was unhurt. His truck was flipped onto its side. At 6:37 p.m., the tornado entered the town limits. It struck the grain elevator first. The elevator was a concrete structure built in the 1950s. The tornado tore off its roof and collapsed one wall. 2 workers were inside. One saw the wall buckle. He ran to a small storage room. He covered his head. The other worker was on the upper level. He fell 12 feet when the floor gave way. He broke his left arm. Both survived. The elevator was a total loss. The grain spilled across the railroad tracks. The cleanup took 3 weeks. The tornado then moved into the residential area. It struck the mobile home park at 6:38 p.m. The first row of homes was hit broadside. The winds were estimated at 165 miles per hour. The mobile homes were lifted off their blocks. Some rolled, some disintegrated. Debris was thrown hundreds of yards. Plywood, insulation, and personal belongings rained down on fields to the east. One mobile home was carried 30 feet and dropped onto a second home. The 2 structures became a pile of twisted metal and fiberglass. William L. Jones was in his mobile home at the time. He was 74 years old. He had lived in the park for 12 years. He had survived a tornado in 1990. That tornado had hit a nearby town. He had sheltered in a basement then. He told his wife that a mobile home could not be safe. But he said that tornadoes never hit the same place twice. His wife Linda was in the kitchen. She heard the wind. She looked out the window. She saw debris flying. She called to William. He was in the living room. He did not move. The tornado struck seconds later. The home lifted. The roof separated. The walls collapsed. Linda was thrown into a closet. She was buried under insulation. She survived with a broken collarbone. William was found 20 feet from the foundation. He had a severe head injury. He died at the scene. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The autopsy noted that he had been struck by a piece of lumber. The lumber was a 2x4. It had come from a neighboring home. It traveled at over 100 miles per hour. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental. The death certificate listed the tornado as the cause. The case was closed within a week. But the question remained, why did William not take shelter? His wife said he did not believe the tornado would hit. He had heard the siren, but he thought it was a test. The siren was tested every Saturday at noon. It was Saturday. The tornado warning came at 6:32 p.m. The siren sounded at 6:33. William told Linda that it was just the weekly test. He did not realize that emergency managers could activate the siren at any time. The town had never done a non-scheduled activation before. There was no protocol for distinguishing a test from a real warning. The siren sounded the same tone. There was no voice announcement. There was no text message. There was no plan. The National Weather Service report on the tornado included a section on public perception. It noted that many residents in the mobile home park did not recognize the siren as a warning. They assumed it was a test. The report recommended that communities use different tones for tests and warnings. It also recommended that siren tests be announced in advance. Mapleton adopted both recommendations in 2008. The new siren system was installed in 2009. It has a different tone for warnings. It also has a voice module that says tornado warning repeatedly. The investigation also looked at the role of the media. The tornado warning was broadcast on television and radio, but the warning was issued at 6:32 p.m. The television stations in Fargo were broadcasting local news. The station interrupted programming at 6:33 p.m. The crawl appeared on screen. The meteorologist broke in at 6:34. By then, the tornado was on the ground. The radio station did not interrupt music. It aired a brief announcement at 6:35, but the mobile home park had few radios turned on. Most residents were watching television, but they were watching their favorite shows. The crawl was easy to miss. The meteorologist's break was short. The warnings did not reach the most vulnerable. The county emergency manager who had activated the siren also called the mobile home park manager. He called at 6:34 p.m. The manager answered. The emergency manager said, "Tornado, take cover." The manager said, "I know." He hung up. He did not go door to door. He later said he assumed the siren was enough. He did not have a list of residents. He did not know who was in the park. He had no way to contact them individually. The gap between warning and action is known in meteorology as the cone of silence. It is the time between when a warning is issued and when people actually take shelter. Studies show that the average person waits 4 to 6 minutes before moving. Some people wait until they see the tornado, others never move at all. The Mapleton tornado had a warning time of 5 minutes. That was enough for some. It was not enough for William Jones. The broader question became, how could a warning system with a 5-minute lead time still fail? The answer lies in the chain of communication. The National Weather Service issued the warning. The county dispatch received it. The siren was activated, the siren was heard, but the sound was misinterpreted. The television and radio messages came too late. The mobile home park manager did not act. The residents had no shelter. One man died. The system did not break. It had gaps. The gaps aligned. The town of Mapleton held a public meeting 2 weeks after the tornado. Over 200 people attended. They demanded answers. The emergency manager explained the siren protocol. He admitted that the siren coverage was poor. He said he would work to fix it. The residents asked about shelters. The answer was that there were none. The town had discussed a safe room but postponed it. The residents asked why. The council members explained the cost. The residents asked why the cost outweighed their lives. There was no answer. The meeting ended with a resolution to apply for a FEMA grant. The resolution passed unanimously. The process of grieving and rebuilding took years. The mobile home park was closed for 6 months. 10 of the 32 homes were destroyed. 15 were damaged beyond repair. The park was rebuilt with new homes. The new homes were tied down. They had anchor straps. The manager was replaced. The new manager was trained in severe weather procedures. He had a list of residents. He had a plan to go door to door if a warning was issued. He had a shelter on site. The shelter was built in 2009. It holds 30 people. It has a generator. It has a weather radio. The town also established a severe weather committee. The committee meets annually in April. It reviews the warning system. It tests the siren. It updates contact lists. It coordinates with the county emergency manager. The committee includes a representative from the mobile home park. It includes a representative from the school. It includes a representative from the grain elevator. The committee is a direct result of the 2007 tornado. The National Weather Service office in Grand Forks also changed its procedures. It began issuing impact-based warnings in 2010. These warnings include tags that describe the expected damage. A catastrophic tag is used only for tornadoes that are likely to cause severe structural damage. The Mapleton tornado would have received that tag. The tag triggers additional notifications. The phone alerts are more urgent. The media coverage is more aggressive. The goal is to increase the sense of urgency. The goal is to prevent another William Jones. The broader legacy of the Mapleton tornado is a cautionary tale about vulnerability. It is a story about how a small town can be overlooked. The warning system worked technically, but the human factors failed. The siren was not understood, the shelter was not built, the trust was misplaced. The tornado was a random act of nature. But the outcome was shaped by decisions made years earlier. The data from the storm is still used by researchers. The damage survey data is part of a long-term study at the University of North Dakota. The study tracks tornado impacts in rural communities. It has found that mobile home residents are 20 times more likely to die in a tornado than people in permanent homes. The study has also found that the presence of a siren does not always improve survival rates. What matters is whether people know what the siren means, and whether they have a place to go. The Mapleton tornado is a reminder that systems are only as strong as their weakest link. The link in 2007 was not the radar, it was not the forecast, it was not the siren, it was the gap between a warning and a safe place. That gap was wide enough to cost a life. It closed only after the event. The town rebuilt. The systems improved. The memory remains. Today, the site of the mobile home park is a quiet street. The homes are newer, the trees are smaller, the residents are aware. When the siren sounds, they move. They do not wait, they do not question. The storm passed, but its imprint on the community remains. The story is not over. It is told again each spring. It is taught to new emergency managers. It is referenced in training exercises. It is a case study in what can go wrong and what can be fixed. The fix came too late for one man, but it came for the town. The town survived. The lesson endures. At 6:34 p.m. on August 26, 2007, the Cass County emergency manager pressed the siren activation button in his office. He had performed this action dozens of times before during weekly tests, but this time was different. The National Weather Service had just issued a tornado warning for Mapleton. The radar showed a debris signature. He did not hesitate. He pressed the button. He did not check if the siren in the mobile home park was working. He did not know it had been malfunctioning for 2 weeks. He did not know the park manager had reported the issue, but the repair had been delayed. The siren activated. It sounded its standard tone, but in the mobile home park the tone was barely audible. The speaker at the park had a damaged amplifier. The sound was muffled. Many residents heard nothing at all. What happened next was a cascade of failures that could not be reversed. The emergency manager had followed protocol. He had acted on a verified warning. He had used the only tool available, but the tool was broken. The broken tool was not his fault. But the chain of responsibility stretched further. The county maintenance contract for siren repairs had expired 3 months earlier. The county commission had not renewed it. The reason was budget cuts. The emergency manager had requested the renewal. The commission had delayed it. They said they would revisit the issue in October. October came after tornado season. The siren stayed broken. The emergency manager did not know the siren was broken. He had not been notified of the repair request. The park manager had called the maintenance company. The company had not reported the issue to the county. The park manager assumed the county would follow up. He was wrong. The investigation into the tornado's fatalities focused on this gap. The report from the National Weather Service included a section titled Siren Performance. It noted that the siren at the mobile home park was operating at 60% of its designed output. The sound level was below the threshold needed to wake a sleeping person or be heard over a television. The report recommended that all sirens be tested monthly with a decibel meter. It also recommended that each siren have a backup communication link. The recommendation was adopted in Cass County in 2009. But for William Jones, it came too late. He had not heard the siren. He had not seen the television crawl. He had not heard the radio announcement. He had no warning. He died in his home. The emergency manager testified at the town hall meeting. He said he was unaware of the malfunction. He said he would have activated a backup siren if he had known. He said the system had no redundancy. The county had not invested in a second siren for the mobile home park. The population of the park was considered too small. The cost of a second siren was estimated at $12,000. The county decided to allocate the money to road repairs instead. The decision was made in January 2007. The tornado hit in August. The cost of not buying that siren was a human life. The broader question emerged: how many other small towns had similar gaps? The National Weather Service conducted a statewide survey of siren coverage the following year. They found that 42% of tornado-prone communities in North Dakota had at least one siren that was not functioning properly. Of those, 75% had no backup system. The report was shared with the state legislature. It led to the creation of a grant program for siren upgrades. The program was funded with $5 million over 4 years. Mapleton received $200,000. The money was used to replace all 3 sirens in town. The new sirens had voice capability. They could broadcast a warning message. They also had a different tone for tests. The tests were announced on the radio and posted on the town website. The emergency manager remained in his position for another 3 years. He retired in 2010. At his retirement ceremony, he was awarded a plaque for service. He did not mention the tornado. He did not mention William Jones. He said he was proud of the improvements. But privately, he told a reporter that he still thought about that night. He said he wished he had driven to the park himself. He said he wished he had broken the protocol and used the backup siren that did not exist. He said the guilt stayed with him. The memory of the tornado also stayed with the residents of the mobile home park. Many of them moved away. Some stayed. One of them, Linda Olson, became an advocate for siren reform. She testified before the state legislature. She said her husband had died because a siren was broken. She said the town had failed him. She said the county had failed him. She said the system had failed him. She ended her testimony with a question: how many more people have to die before you fix the sirens? The legislature passed the grant program the next session. Linda Olson still lives in Mapleton. She keeps a weather radio on her kitchen counter. She has a plan. When the new siren sounds, she goes to the community shelter. She does not have a basement in her modular home. She does not trust the tie-downs. She knows the odds. She knows the story. She tells it to her grandchildren. They know what the siren means. They do not ask if it is a test. They move. The lesson endures.